President Xi Jinping holds virtual meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. NPC Standing Committee is believed to have approved the interpretation of Hong Kong's national security law. Cathay Pacific Union threatens industrial action. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a meeting via video conference this afternoon when Xi vowed to step up Chinese-Russian partnership. Putin said he expects Xi to visit Russia in the spring of 2023. Jackie Lin reports.
The virtual meeting between President Xi and Putin was held against the backdrop of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. In his introductory remark, Xi noted China's readiness to beef up strategic political cooperation with Russia in the face of the difficult international situation. Russian President Vladimir Putin said he was expecting President Xi to make a state visit to Moscow in spring 2023. Describing Xi as a dear friend, Putin said the visit would demonstrate to the world the closeness of Russian-Chinese relations. Putin said relations between the two countries were growing in importance as a stabilizing factor and an exemplar of cooperation under an increasingly tense global situation, and that the two countries could help construct a fair world order. Putin wished the Chinese people a happy new year with peace and prosperity and said that the two nations will deepen military collaboration. Back in September, Xi and Putin had a face-to-face meeting in Uzbekistan, where Putin acknowledged Xi's concerns about the situation in Ukraine. In February, Putin made a state visit to China. Just last week, Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council Dmitry Medvedev met President Xi in Beijing, with bilateral ties and the conflict of Ukraine on the agenda. On the Ukraine war, China has been stressing the need for peace, though stopped short of condemning Moscow's military campaign. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
State media CCTV reported the National People's Congress Standing Committee has passed two bills explaining its interpretation of the Hong Kong national security law. That involves the decision on whether overseas lawyers are allowed to handle the city's national security-related trials.
During the four-day meeting of the National People's Congress Standing Committee, it's understood that the agenda includes the vetting of the draft of the amendment and the decision about the interpretation of the Hong Kong national security law. Earlier, the meeting listened to a briefing by the State Council's Director of Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, Xia Baolong, over a motion on the city's request for an interpretation of relevant articles of the law. The relevant contents were also discussed during a standing committee meeting on Thursday. Last month, the city's top court dismissed the Department of Justice's appeal against the decision to allow King's Counsel Timothy Owen from the UK to represent Next Digital founder Jimmy Lai in a case related to Hong Kong national security law. Following the Court of Final Appeals ruling, Chief Executive John Lee announced he will seek the NPCSC's interpretation of the national security law. Meanwhile, the Standing Committee has decided the 14th National People's Congress will open its first annual session in Beijing on March 5th next year. The first session of the 14th National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference is set to take place on March the 4th. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
The largest union of Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific is issuing an ultimatum to the flagship carrier to improve the roster arrangements and pay. Cathay Pacific Airways Flight Attendants Union said after the company's layoffs 2 years ago, the new contracts changed the calculation method for working hours. That in turn has lowered their wages. The cabin crew union threatens to take industrial action over the Lunar New Year holidays if the company doesn't give a favorable response. In response, Cathay Pacific said it has worked to improve January's roster arrangements and believes that the pay will improve as the airline resumes more flights. It says it has confidence in its crew to hold fast to their duties. Malaysia and South Korea are the latest countries to join the USA, India, Italy and Japan to screen air travelers from China, including Hong Kong and Macau, for COVID when arriving in those countries. This as the Director General of the World Health Organization expressed concerns over the evolving situation in China regarding the tracking of COVID-19. Tracy Furness reports.
Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization, took to Twitter to express his concern about the evolving COVID situation in China. Although he encouraged China to track the coronavirus and offered support with clinical care, he said he understood why other countries want to protect their population. In the absence of comprehensive information from China, it is understandable that countries around the world are acting in ways that they believe may protect their populations, he said. Meanwhile, Ji Young-mi, Commissioner of the Korean Disease Control and Prevention Agency, said Friday that from January 5th, all South Korean nationals and foreigners arriving from China to South Korea must submit the results of a PCR test taken within 48 hours or a rapid antigen test taken by experts within 24 hours of arrival. The country will also restrict the issuance of short-term visas in China until the quarantine situation stabilizes. In Italy, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said Thursday that she hopes the European Union will follow its lead on imposing mandatory COVID tests for all passengers flying in from China. But EU health officials could not agree on one course of action when they held talks Thursday morning. If the rest of Europe do not agree to impose mandatory COVID tests at airports, Italy's efforts will not be effective in the borderless bloc. Milan Airport started testing passengers arriving from Beijing and Shanghai on December 26 and found almost half of them were infected. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
The city reported 27,830 new COVID cases today and 72 infected patients died. With the daily death toll rising, doctors call on residents aged 50 or above to take the BioNTech bivalent vaccines for better protection. Hong Kong's daily COVID infection tally surpassed the 20,000 mark for 3 consecutive days. About 26,884 cases were locally acquired. 64 residents and 13 staff members were infected among 48 care homes for the elderly and disabled. 51 schools have reported 95 infection cases. 72 COVID patients died, the highest daily mortality since July, bringing the city's death toll during the 5th wave of the pandemic to 11,755. With daily COVID infections staying at high levels and the recent relaxation of social distancing measures, many Hong Kongers are taking COVID jabs for further protections, including the bivalent vaccines. Jackie Lin reports.
This morning, residents could be seen waiting in line at the Java Road Playground Community Vaccination Station, trying to take the 4th jab, which includes the option of the bivalent vaccine.
Better to have the vaccine, to continue vaccine, because, in case you got a positive, I think just it's lightly the symptoms. Unlike the no vaccine.
With the mainland border reopening soon, some residents decided to take another jab for stronger protection.
We heard the news that the port will open. Yeah, the mainland people will come here. There is a chance that the pandemic will spread very quickly in recent 2 weeks. So we think it's a good time for us to get a 4th vaccine. But we didn't make the reservation booking online, so we need to this afternoon we need to come in person and get the ticket for today's vaccine.
According to the online booking system, many vaccination sites have been fully booked for the next few days. People aged 60 or above can collect a same-day ticket for appointment-free vaccinations, but they still have to wait for a long time.
More than 1 hour. But for walking in, there are many oldies there, very old. Some of them are in their 90s, and they're not familiar with the appointment system. So when they walk in and they have to wait for 1 hour or more than 1 hour in the cold, not so good.
Under the government's vaccination plan, bivalent vaccines and vaccines for infants are available for free for Hong Kong residents. Secretary for the Civil Service Ingrid Yeung, who oversees the city's vaccination campaign, said she noticed a recent rise in demand for bivalent vaccines. She says starting today, 4 more community vaccination stations will begin operation to provide more BioNTech vaccine services. Quotas at private clinics will also be beefed up gradually starting this Saturday. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Still to come on tonight's news. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will visit China next month. and special traffic arrangements in Hong Kong on New Year's Eve. Welcome back to TVB News. In Myanmar, a court found deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi guilty in all 5 counts of corruption today. In a closed courtroom, Suu Kyi, 77, was sentenced to a combined 7 years in prison for the offences, said a source who declined to be identified due to the sensitivity of the case. The Nobel Peace Prize winner has previously been ordered to serve a total of 26 years in prison after being found guilty of a wide range of offences, all of which she denied. The Philippines Department of Foreign Affairs said President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. hopes to sign a number of agreements during a visit to Beijing next week. The department said a number of projects were under discussion, including in agriculture, renewable energy, nickel processing, tourism, and bridge construction. Marcos is due to meet with President Xi Jinping during his January 3rd to 5th visit. China accounts for 20% of the Philippines' foreign trade and is also a major source of foreign direct investment. Despite those economic ties, the sides have repeatedly feuded over China's claims to islands and waters in the strategically key South China Sea. The two sides plan to sign an agreement to boost communication to avoid miscalculations. According to the U.S. military, a Chinese military plane came within 6 meters of an American Air Force aircraft and forced it to take evasive maneuvers to avoid a collision in international airspace over the South China Sea last week. The incident, which involved a Chinese Navy J-11 fighter jet and a U.S. Air Force RC-135 aircraft, reportedly took place on December 21st. Washington's military statement said the U.S. plane was lawfully conducting routine operations over the South China Sea in international airspace. A separate U.S. official said the White House has raised the issue with Beijing. China has repeatedly criticized the United States for sending ships and aircraft into the South China Sea, saying it is not good for peace. With the Arctic weather in the U.S., more than 1 million passengers have been affected after Southwest Airlines cancelled over 15,000 flights across the country in recent days. The airline is beginning to resume normal operation now, but still faces numerous challenges. This report from NBC News.
After days of what industry experts call a massive meltdown, tonight Southwest Airlines says it's prepared to return to normal operations tomorrow. So far, fewer than 50 cancellations are planned. A vast improvement after a week that saw more than 15,000 flights canceled, including more than 2,300 just today.
I haven't given up yet, but I have given up on Southwest.
It comes as executives scramble to salvage relationships with customers.
We're continuing to work to make this up to you, and you'll hear more about that soon.
Part of that work, Southwest says, reimbursing passengers, not just for canceled flights, but for hotels, food, and other transportation. Customers can submit receipts via email, and the airline will spend the next few weeks processing each case. All of it under pressure and threat of penalty from the Department of Transportation.
The airline said to me that they were going to go above and beyond what's required of them. I'm looking to make sure they actually do that. And if they don't, we are in a position to levy tens of thousands of dollars per violation, per passenger in fines.
Does your department share any blame in this, sir? Should you have seen this coming?
We have taken every step to increase the standard of customer service right now. Now, I can't go in and fix an IT system for an individual airline that is failing to do its job. But as a watchdog, our department is going to do everything it takes to hold them accountable for their treatment of their passengers.
But for countless passengers, the frustration has followed them home.
It's not an acceptable situation for anyone.
When Southwest canceled Jared Bernstein's connecting flight, he and his wife were stranded in Denver with their 13-month-old daughter. That meant a mountain of unplanned expenses.
Everything from Uber to car rental to hotel to baby supplies to even a stroller.
After 2 days, the total price tag, more than $1,800.
Let's find out how we get our money back.
Jared spent the day on the airline's website trying to get it back.
Southwest does need to make this right, and that starts with reimbursing expenses.
British fashion designer Dame Vivienne Westwood died Thursday in London, aged 81. Known as an influential fashion maverick who played a key role in the 1970s punk movement, Westwood was also known for her political activism, especially concerning climate, eco-issues and the homeless. Tracy Furness reports.
As the designer who dressed the Sex Pistols, Vivienne Westwood, who died Thursday, was synonymous with 1970s punk rock. Together with Sex Pistols manager Malcolm McLaren, she defied the hippie trends of the time to sell rock and roll clothing. They moved on to torn outfits adorned with chains sold in their shop in London's King's Road. The rebelliousness remained a hallmark of the unapologetic political designer who became one of British fashion's biggest names. Fashion writer Sasha Wilkins said of Westwood,
"The death of Dame Vivienne Westwood is, of course, a huge loss to not just the British fashion industry, but the global fashion industry as well. It was the way in which she merged fashion and music to be agents of radical change that really did put her on the map. Safety pins, torn T-shirts, slogans, pirate boots. These are all the things which Dame Vivienne brought onto the British fashion scene."
Westwood used her public profile to champion issues including disarmament and to protest against anti-terrorism laws and government spending policies that hit the poor. She frequently turned her models into catwalk eco-warriors. Born Vivienne Isabel Swire on April 8, 1941 in Glossop in the English Midlands, her family moved to London when she was a teenager. She met her first husband, Derek Westwood, while she was a primary school teacher in the early 1960s. They had one son but divorced in 1966. On Twitter, her fashion house said, "The world needs people like Vivienne to make a change for the better." Her store in Los Angeles was closed with a sign reading, "Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be closed until further notice." A single bouquet of white roses lay in the doorway. Westwood is survived by her second husband, Austrian-born Andreas Kronthaler, and her two sons. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Back locally, during tomorrow's night's New Year's Eve celebrations, there will be special traffic and transport arrangements on Hong Kong Island and around Tsim Sha Tsui, as the police expect more crowds than the Christmas Eve. With the easing of social distancing curbs and with countdown activities across Victoria Harbour, more areas in Tsim Sha Tsui and Tsim Sha Tsui East will be subject to road closures and traffic diversions starting 8:30 p.m. until early Sunday morning. Vehicles will only be able to access and exit the area via Science Museum Road. In Central, only pedestrians will be allowed into nightlife hotspot Lan Kwai Fong starting 2 p.m. Road closures will also be in place at Central Pier and the Golden Bihania Square in Wan Chai. Members of the public are advised to make use of public transport services and avoid driving to busy areas. That's the news. Thanks for watching.